Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are joined by Ivan Timofeev, an associate professor at MGIMO University, also a program director at the Valdai Discussion Club, and the Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. So coming from Moscow in his car, I'm very happy to speak with you again.
Hi, Glenn. Good to see you again. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, I wanted to ask you about some articles you've written, but first I just wanted to ask you your opinions on the current negotiations between the United States and Russia. Again, I would consider this to be the two largest actors, of course, given that this is largely a NATO-Russia conflict playing out with a Ukrainian proxy. But uh, it seems to flip a bit back and forth. First, Trump said he would divorce himself from the war, then he was going to negotiate, then he seems to take more and more ownership, and now he's making the statement it's not his war, we're preparing to walk away. Do you see any path forward in terms of Russia and the US making a deal, or is this is no path forward and this is just taking
Well,
time?
I think that to answer this question, we should try to understand the U.S. interests as seen by President Trump. So apparently, he believes that the Ukrainian issue is not a matter of high priority for the U.S., and that's why this issue does not deserve heavy investments, which had been done before. So the influx of the injections of billions of dollars to bolster Ukrainian military capabilities, directly and indirectly, simply do not provide the sufficient political benefit for the U.S. He does not recognize Russia as a major um, existential challenge to the United States. And as far as Russia is not a major existential challenge, then what's the reason to invest into this conflict? So, following this logic, there are two options. One option is to have a deal, and his diplomacy is trying to make this. However, Russia has its own interests and its own demands, and Moscow is not going to compromise, at least significantly, the the major demands connected with the Ukrainian NATO membership, the presence of foreign troops, and the rights of Russian-speaking people, and the status of the new territories, which is also an issue. So if he doesn't have a deal, I mean, Mr. Trump, then the option for him is just to abstain from this issue, right? So the US may continue some injections of resources to Ukraine, but Ukraine will lose in this scenario its significance as topic number one for the US. Mr. Zelensky used to be a hero in the US political community at first years of this conflict. Now, Ukraine is something which is important, but not as um, fresh and demanded in Washington, D.C. under the new administration. So both options are possible. I believe he will try to make some deal. The question is about the sustainability of this deal and doability of this deal. But if the deal fails, he may use new round of sanctions against Russia, but at the same time, he may simply abstain from the role which had been played by the US under Biden's administration.
Well, it seems, yeah, because the Europeans and Ukrainians on one side and the Russians on the other, it's a very huge gap between them. It seems as if he's giving the ultimatum, either make a deal or we'll walk away, that this is a pressure intended for the former. That is, it's not much of a pressure for Russia if America pulls out of this war. Indeed, it would be very beneficial. But on the other hand, America doesn't really have any leverage to pressure Russia, as everything has been already thrown at it and absorbed. So if he wants to make a deal, I guess pragmatically it has to be the pressure against the Ukrainians and the Europeans. Uh, but if is he able to get a deal though? Because unlike what one hears in the media, neither Trump or Putin are dictators. They need to have a political system behind them. They have to
Yeah.
sell whatever comes through. So you think he's able to actually get domestic approval for this, as well as for whatever deal he's after?
Well, Mr. Trump has a credit in the U.S. Political community to make a deal. It's clear that he will not compromise the U.S. interests, and he is a proponent of a realistic diplomacy, which implies the compromises. So, in a sense, the difference of Trump from Biden is the difference of the style of diplomacy. In case of Biden, the Western diplomacy in general had a logic of 20th century. This is a logic of capitulation. So either Russia capitulates or we continue. But this doesn't work. Russia does not capitulate, and it won't. As far as the leverage is not as effective to force Russian capitulation, then the diplomacy shifts to the style of 18th century, when militarized disputes really led to the collapse of the adversary of the foe, and these conflicts usually ended up with agreements, with deals, right? So Trump now is pursuing this 18th century style of diplomacy rather than 20th century style of diplomacy. In this sense, it's reasonable to expect that the readiness to some sort of mutual concessions. And I believe that both leaders have the necessary amount of legitimacy and trust in their societies and in their political systems to make such a deal and even to make some compromises, right? Acceptable to each side.
Well, yeah, you say compromises that both sides might be willing to give something. What do you see on the Russian side, though? What might they be willing to to give in? Because well, again, the Russian position has been neutrality for Ukraine, which also means no NATO soldiers there. Accepting these four territories lost, reducing the size of the Ukrainian army, denazification, which means get rid of the current government, rights for Russian speakers, etc. But is this an opening position, or is all of this non-negotiable? Because usually one leaves oneself with some leeway. I mean, if it's reducing the size of the Ukrainian army, how much? In terms of the accepting loss of four territories, would there be any openness to change some administrative borders, you think, in terms of what territory each side actually do control? I don't know. Again, you don't, Putin's not telling you, but, but what do you see in terms of the possibilities which you think that Russia might be willing to, in what areas one might be willing to make a compromise?
Well, the first step that Russia can actually propose as a kind of goodwill gesture, or not just a goodwill gesture, but as a bargaining chip, right? And it's an important bargaining chip. Is a agreement to have ceasefire, right? So for Russian diplomacy, ceasefire is not a goal in itself. It may be an instrument to achieve broader goals, and it's a bargaining chip, right? Because Russian army is moving forward step by step of Ukraine are getting worse. right? So if Russian army stops, then itself this would be a kind of a cheap on our side, right? As for the bigger parameters, I would say that the points you have mentioned, they would remain, but lots depend on details, right? So if we uh, look at the, um, for instance, at the parameters of um, division line between the two armies and the kind of a new border, uh, there will be a discussion, right? How to make it? What would be the would there be any neutral space between uh, these armies? Um, uh, what would be the new borders recognized by actually taken by Russia as acceptable, right? And again, it's clear that Crimea is not a matter of discussion at all. But what about the emergence of the Russian troops in Kharkov, Kharkivsky Oblast, in Sumsky Oblast, for instance? They are not recognized as a part of Russia, but they are some parts of these oblasts are controlled by the Russian troops. Again, this is another bargaining chip. Here we may have a space for maneuver, right? As for Donetsk and Lugansk People Republic, again, the question is, what would, to what extent would Americans be ready to recognize the control of Russians and on what territory, right? Would it be the territory which is de facto controlled, or would it be the administrative borders, which I doubt, or something else? So, but getting back to these bargaining chips, I believe that in the Russian hands, the ceasefire is one of the low-hanging fruits, right? It's something which can be exchanged uh, for some obligations on other issues.
It seems it would be very difficult to sell it, though, if, as you say, it's seen in Russia now that Ukraine would be standing on its last leg. The Americans are pulling out, and at the cusp of victory, uh, one would accept ceasefire in which the Europeans have said they will, continue to pump weapons in. The British say they might send troops. Wouldn't this be a very difficult sell in Russia, or would it be require something significant in return in order to justify this to a population which has also suffered in this conflict?
Well, I believe that the emergence of the Western troops in Ukraine is unacceptable for Russia, and it's quite dangerous for the West in general, right? But because if the conflict restarts at some point, then what would be the role of these troops? Would they be involved into the new militarized clash, or and if they are, what would be the direction of NATO? And are NATO members ready? The rest of them are ready to get involved into the militarized dispute with Russia, into the war with Russia, right? Um, it's a big question. As for other parameters, I would say that Russia can bargain on some details, but if these major demands are satisfied, even taking into account some concessions on the level of technicalities or tactics, etc., then that can be considered result of, of the war, of the military campaign, and this will be supported by the society, in my view.
I wanted to shift a bit, to the wider topic of because Russia and the United States aren't only talking about Ukraine. It's recognized as they're preparing for a new world effectively, and part of the discussion regards an article which you recently wrote, which is the Nord Stream discussion. So for people who hasn't followed, this is after the destruction of Nord Stream, which I guess everyone now recognizes was the United States, if not directly, which it probably was, then at least with its green lighting and assistance. But nonetheless, there's now discussions between Russia and the United States to revive this pipeline. But instead of being a Europe-Russia project, it would be a US Russia project, if I'm not mistaken. How do you see this as being likely? Because on one hand, the Americans never liked Europe becoming too dependent on Russia. They've, even all the way to, as you write, to the Cold War, they wanted to disrupt any energy cooperation between the Russians and the Europeans. On the other hand, this would also cement more power of the United States over the Europeans. It would also give them an extra revenue. So, and Russia gets to diversify its sales. So it's a bit of a win-win. Well, not for the Europeans, but for the United States and Russia. So, but nonetheless, do you see this going forward? Because it does, seem to clash with some of the traditional interests of the Americans, at least.
Well, yeah, you're right that there is a legacy of the U.S. Uh, counteraction vis-a-vis Russian pipeline projects, and Trump, in his first term, used to be a proponent and a champion of the containment of Russian projects, alternative routes, which would directly connect Russia with the European markets, with the EU markets, right? So now, well, there are speculations about some possible changes, though there is no official statement about this. No official statement. Rather speculations of the media. So I really have there are lots of obstacles on U.S.-Russia cooperation on this track, along with this political legacy which I mentioned. This is a technical obstacle which implies purports the difficulty of repair of the three lines of the Nord Stream 2. So it will take time, it will take investments, and Americans, by the way, will have to make exemptions from their own legislation, which implies sanctions against those who are providing vessels, pipeline vessels, right? So that they will have to reconsider their own legislation. And politically speaking, and economically speaking, Americans are feeling quite comfortable occupying the EU energy market. So the re-emergence of the Russian natural gas may contradict the long-term U.S. Interests. And Trump, in his critiques of Nord Stream 2, used to use exactly the economic logic, right? So now it will be uneasy to justify this cooperation. To make long story short, I simply don't buy the idea and the speculation about U.S.-Russia cooperation Nord Stream 2, but I may be mistaken, of course. We'll see.
Yeah, because the eventually I thought it could be predictable that at some point the Europeans, if they want to revive their economies, they do need to restore economic cooperation with Russia. And indeed, for the Americans, it would also be to an advantage that Europe doesn't grow too weak, that they are able to reindustrialize or get access to energy. So. But if this will happen anyways, it would be better for the Americans if this all happens under their control, I guess.
Well, I wouldn't say that the access to the Russian energy resources is a major factor of reindustrialization of Europe. There are many other factors, though energy matters, of course, and Russian gas, natural gas, is still on the EU market, though, in much less volumes and proportions, right? So this is only one factor which is important, but not the not the major one, I would say. So in terms of U.S.-Russia economic cooperation, it used to be quite tiny before the conflict in Ukraine. So the trade between U.S. And Russia accounted to 1/2 of U.S. trade with Belgium. So, and Belgium is not the biggest countries of the EU, right? So this trade was quite modest, and it has never been a major factor of U.S.-Russia relations, right? So politically, it won't harm if there is a number of new projects between Russians and Americans on in some areas in the Arctic, for instance. Though in the Arctic, they also have sanctions regimes which preclude the participation of American business in these projects. They will have to revoke or waive or suspend these sanctions regimes, right? So in sum, I don't see a rationale of a stable, well-grounded rationale for U.S.-Russia cooperation on Nord Stream 2.
No, I think you're probably correct. I mean, I see the logic behind it, but yeah, I don't see it playing out in that way. I
Yeah,
just on the final thing I wanted to ask you though is about yeah, another article you have, which I thought was interesting. I know Rein Mullerson, he was making a similar argument comparing the current state of the United States with Gorbachev and the Soviet Union. Well, his argument is essentially the same. The US has run itself into a very difficult spot. It needs to reform in a big way. But much like Gorbachev, he broke it when trying to fix it. So, yeah, could you flesh out your argument? How do you see the United States possibly going the way of the USSR? I mean, it's in the United States, a key argument against the hegemonic order was that if the US would try to have a global empire or hegemony instead of accepting a multipolar world, the prediction was the US would eventually exhaust itself before other powers would balance it, BRICS, what you see now, in opposition to the United States. And with this exhaustion, you would see it being economically, which you've seen. You see social problems building, which we've seen, political polarization, political violence. So again, things aren't looking well. They need to do some huge changes, and they could break in this process. I'm not sure anyone in the world would actually benefit from a collapse in America. It's better to have more America accepting more moderate position in the world. But yeah, that being said, irrespective of being for or against anything, what is seeing being? How do you see this? Well, can you flesh out the argument? I guess.
well, it's a big topic, and you're right that the similarity between the Trump's agenda and Gorbachev's agenda is in terms of the idea that resources should be concentrated, the bad assets should be shrinked, and these bad assets imply excessive geopolitical burdens. So for the USSR, there was an attempt to get out from the Cold War logic and to concentrate these excessive expenses on the development. The idea failed due to different reasons. One of the reasons was the state of institutions and speed of changes and the overall collapse of the political system, the fragility of this system, right? In the US case, I don't believe that the consequences will be the same, but the scale of shrinking of these bad assets would be different, right? So they are not, let's say, proposing the exit from the competition and uh, from the disputes on the international arena. Americans are just trying to reconfigure them, right? To redirect resources, to concentrate on the directions which are more, or which seem to be more um, important for them at this current point. So, which is China, not Russia, right? To get rid of the trap of dual containment. I don't think that these changes would lead to some external collapses inside the U.S. U.S. political system seems to be more flexible and capable to adapt to these challenges. So this won't lead to the collapse of the U.S. Right? But the very idea of sanation of bad assets is actually comparable to the one of Mikhail Gorbachev. I'm not sure if Mr. Trump will get his Nobel Prize as President Gorbachev uh, had in the future, in the past, but we'll see, of course.
Yeah. Well, I agree with your assessment of that. I think people often underestimate how resilient the U.S. Republic is. That is its own political system. But it's often said that the U.S. is now pushing an empire which could kill the Republic. So I guess I see the main weakness essentially of Trump, the policies of reorganizing America and the world, that is more of a threat to the empire than the Republic. So you're right, for example, about trying to strengthen the position of the U.S. Republic, cementing some of the control. It entails some of the policies you've seen, like threatening to take Greenland, the more ambiguous threats against Canada, what they
Yes.
actually did to Panama Canal and this kind of things, and also threatening to take the chip industry in Taiwan, to get it back to America. A lot of this would strengthen, I guess, the economic resilience of the U.S. as a republic. But this is killing the empire, though, isn't it? If you're doing threatening your closest allies to yeah, to make sure. Well, again,
Yeah.
if the main problem is that the empire has been bleeding resources to its own allies, which is why Trump went out of NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, wouldn't doing the opposite be good for America but bad for the empire?
Well, I think it's a fair point, and it's for me these threats to Denmark on Greenland and threats to trolling of of Canada. Uh, it's not clear if to what extent is it serious, and I believe it's a mistake. It's excessive, and for instance, Americans do not need to grab Greenland because they already have a heavy military presence in Greenland, and Denmark has never um, precluded the Americans from keeping their finger in the Greenland pie, right? So that has never been a problem. So in my view, it's a mistake to over exaggerate this and to make a problem of it, right? I don't see any benefit for the US of this. Same as with Canada, right? So this Trump's trolling or rhetorics helped contributed to the results of the elections. So the political forces in Canada which were doomed to fail in the elections, they could win, right? Capitalizing these threats from Mr. Trump. And it's a big question for me. What is the benefit, right? Of this of making allies suspicious and hostile towards the United States, right? Probably this is an attempt to show who is the master in this club, who is on the top, who is a king of the hill, right? And here the Mr. Vance, Vice President Vance, speech in Munich was also in this line of critiques vis-a-vis Europe, European Union, right? The Western Europe and the Eastern one. So for me, it's a big question why. Uh, I I believe this is something which may be regarded in the future as a mistake of this administration.
No, it probably is. I mean, you mentioned Vance. Yeah, he was also making the argument because you have to create a narrative once you're gonna, well, for example, seize the territory of a key ally. And yeah, the statement he made that, Denmark doesn't care about Greenland, and also Denmark's been a terrible ally for America. I mean, Denmark has done almost, yeah, no, not almost done everything America told them to do. So they've been one of the most obedient allies. So it is, yeah, it's just factually wrong, I guess, that they've been a
Yeah,
bad ally. But
absolutely.
no, so yeah, I'm also a bit perplexed because same with this statement saying against Canada. I don't think
Yeah,
anyone in the right mind believes that the Canadians would actually accept becoming, surrendering their sovereignty, becoming an American state. So I guess that's my question. Why would you do this then? If there's no
yeah,
chance in, snowball's chance in hell, why would you threaten their sovereignty? All you will do is fuel a very strong anti-American sentiment within society. So
absolutely.
is this more about, like you said, making sure you accept we're boss, or is it more about Trump's as a person that is, or again, this is difficult for me.
Yeah, well, it's difficult for me too. Probably, well, we had a prominent politician in Russia, Mr. Zhirinovsky, who passed away. But he was famous for his let's say radical and at some point populistic proposals. So in his cabinet, he had a map of Russia in the borders of Russian Empire, right? So he liked this narrative, and he was popular in some segments of Russian society, right? So probably Mr. Trump is employing same tactics, partly due to electoral reasons. There are segments of American society which are buying this, which are having fun of this, right? So for us, for those who are studying international relations and doing them, who are who are practicing them, it's strange, right? But for his electorate, maybe even co-electorate, this is something which they consider to be a piece of cake, right? So probably this has an rather an internal locus, not the external one.
Now that's yeah, fascinating comparison though with Zhirinovsky, because I also
Yeah,
saw him in this aspect, because I can understand his popularity coming out of the 90s when Russia had
yeah,
been broken and humiliated, and then you have someone who pretty much lays claim to Alaska, or like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I can see,
Poland as well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Poland.
So I can see when you're humiliated why someone would use this aggressive rhetoric of claim of greatness, and then of course they will attract a crowd. And I guess now that the United States is going through a different, well, not the same, but yeah, huge difficulties. They always gone from strength to strength. Now they're weakened, so I can see why someone, yeah, showing this amount of strength and pushing around even their allies could be seen as yeah, appealing to an audience. Anyways, Ivan Timofeev, yeah, it's always great to speak with you. So yeah, so thank you again.
Thank you, Glenn. Bye.
Bye.